Thank you, all friends. And well, we have been discussing this issue in many of the forums before, and we have benefited quite a lot also from Dr. Rebecca Johnson's summer course that she gave 2 years ago, and explaining all the details about the nuclear issues. And so I'm very happy that today in this panel, many of us have come back together so that we could review the situation and also continue the dialogue. I think I will be speaking for 15 minutes and then the eminent speakers after me will be giving very significant perspectives on the issue. But I think the question for us is when we talk of Fukushima in Japanese, Fukushima has such a beautiful name, meaning Fortune Island, Happiness Island. And it does not deserve the catastrophes that befell it and its residents, farmers, and animals. But when we talk about the catastrophe, so people would argue, what is the nature of the catastrophe? Is it natural or is it man-made? In 1967, then when this plant was being built, so there were different ways of different choices of building it. And after the accident, some people were talking about the tsunami, but then some people were also digging into issues which could be man-made factors. So for example, the Wall Street Journal already started talking about the technical issues 3 months after the accident. It said that, well, when the nuclear reactor was, when the power plant was to be built, they removed from the cliff 25 meters, and so when it should have stood on 35 meters, and hence could have escaped the tsunami. Yet, because the government at that time, because of the companies at that time, were trying to find an easy way to make transportation of equipment easier, more convenient, etc., in order to save money and in order to for certain factors, they decided on, well, removing from under it, so that when the 15-meter tsunami came, the reactors were 5 meters below the tsunami. Hence, there was the flooding. So we see many of these kind of discussions that would go into the technical issues. And is this an important detail? Of course, yes. So we will find. But of course, on the other hand, then from afterwards, when we look back, then we will all have the wisdoms to say this should have been done, this shouldn't have been done. But we have to ask, I think, one question further. That is it only technical issues itself, or and so the accident happened because they shouldn't have built it on that low level. They shouldn't have chopped the cliff off, or is it much more than technical issues? So if we look further, we can see that it is often, of course, related to money and interests. But we still have to, I think we still need to go a little bit further to ask some of the fundamental questions. So the fundamental question in relation to nuclear power is, do we have the safety guarantee for the use of nuclear power before we actually use it, we actually put it to use? Have we all the remedies and all the solutions to deal with the spent fuel, to deal with possible contamination, to deal with possible accidents before we actually launch all these nuclear power plants? But then such a simple question that should have been asked never seems to have been answered. And we have to see why. Why is it that we do not pursue to the end these questions which are of such significance? And so we have to ask, is it because we have been too much trapped in the rhetoric of modernization that we need energy, and with the energy that can make our lives cozy and convenient? So on this question, well, I'm no expert. Dr. Rebecca Johnson is an expert to explain the difference between the nuclear fission and the nuclear fusion. And yet, for both technologies, well, of course, the latter one is still being developed, but then for nuclear fission itself, we can see that there are such a lot of underlying questions that have not been answered yet, and yet we are already using nuclear power everywhere. So this is a question, I think, which shouldn't be left only to scientists and experts. It is a question that every one of us as common people, as common folk, being subordinated to the catastrophes. These are the questions that I think we should be asking and should be seeking an answer to. So after the accident, then we also see the discussion. The discussion is, should we choose between non-renewable fossil fuel, or should we choose the so-called clean energy? So it seems that we will be vacillating between the two, as if we have only these two choices. But the question is, can we look at the whole question about energy itself and see whether the kind of energy that is seems to be so demanded of is really that necessary? So I think this is also a question that we have to answer, because at the same time when we are faced with the nuclear power plant accidents, we are also having the climate catastrophe, the climate collapse that is actually impending. So experts are also saying that it may be before 2050, if the average temperature rises above 2 degrees Celsius, then this world, this earth that we are inhabiting is almost uninhabitable. And so I think we need to go into certain questions. So I will attempt to list some of these questions for our discussions. The first question I think we could have to ask is, well, in nuclear power, what are the vested interests? What are the vested interests involved in the promotion, the generation, and the use of nuclear power? Of course, there's the monetary aspect, because big corporations, then they are running these, they are reaping profits. And so that is one question. And then we also have a lot of reports about the collusion between the Japanese government and the nuclear power companies, and how the government, the intellectuals, the academics, the mass media, and the corporations are of one interest block. But then we also know that nuclear power, supposedly to be for civilian use, supposed to improve our lives, they come from the nuclear weapons. And I think this point must not go into the shadows. And when there has always been the insistence on safe use of nuclear power, then we know that it is not safe at all. But the question is not just because of safety, but the question is the nuclear power plants must be there in order for the nuclear weapons to be produced. And we have seen reports which say in what period, within how many weeks, Japan can actually produce nuclear weapons if the need arises. And that is, I think, one very important factor behind the development of nuclear power. So There is the military dimensions, the geopolitical dimensions, and that is also why when we look at nuclear power plant accidents, we must also put it in the context of global geopolitics and see the armament race and see all the threats that will be threatening humanity itself, threatening the whole earth itself. That is, can we afford a fourth world war when nuclear weapons are being used? So if we say that it is a question of, the second question I would like to pose is, if we say that it is 1% versus the 99%, then do the 1% is the vested interest, the military, political, financial blocks, then how about the 99%? Do the 99% share a consensual common sense? So how far is it our own denial, our own excuse of being cheated? To what extent is it our own simple ignorance? So I would like to give one example. That is the dumping of the contaminated water. When there was an announcement 2 months ago that the Japanese government said, we've decided that we cannot hold these contaminated water anymore. Well, we have to dump that into the sea, and of course with a lot of justifications to say that this is not really harmful, etc. The whole world rose, almost the whole world rose, and mass media, social media, every people came up and said, well, this is impossible. We cannot accept this. And we have fisher folk coming out to say that this would affect their livelihood. We have the consumers saying that this is going to affect our the intake and our health. But then what I wonder is, when everybody is talking about the contaminated water, but then has anyone really gone in and insisted on the argument that why is it that the tons and tons, hundreds of tons of contaminated water is being produced every day? Every day. If we simply have to ask this question, then we will have to look back and see that nothing, almost nothing has been done to the reactors, to reactor 1 and reactor 3, where there was the accident, where there was the melting of the core, and so many robots have been manufactured, but nothing much has progressed. And what do we see from the government? The government has been giving us the comforting news to say that, okay, in 3 years, we will start decommissioning this one. In 4 years, we are going to build a roof above it, and then we are going to remove the spent fuels, etc., etc. But then if we say it is postponement after postponement, and if we really look at the schedule, please go and take a look at the schedule that the Japanese government has offered. In how many years did they say, or are they saying that this question, that the exploded reactors will be decommissioned and we will be safe, that Fukushima will be safe and people could return? So I think now with the Olympic Games, and I feel that it is a distraction to say that we are starting the relay of the torch from the site where there was very near the accident. So there's a lot of pretense, a lot of hypocrisy to try to pretend that things have returned to normal. And every time we hear hear the media say, well, it's only a small percent of area that is still not safe. But if we look at the reactor itself, the the two reactors itself, then we know how serious the problem is. So it's not only a question of the Japanese government or the TEPCO trying to distract or deceive. The question is, on the receiving end, why is it that these questions, certain fundamental questions, have not been persistently asked from the side of the common folk, from the side of the victims? So I would like to end by saying, talking about hope. I think this time we have decided that the theme of our forum is about the politics of hope. But why should we put such emphasis on hope? Because everywhere there's despair. Everywhere there's maybe a sense of helplessness. So can we get out of this helplessness? Can we find ways to go out of this despair? And so can we talk about politics of hope, not as a utopia, not as wishful thinking, but can we see all this hope already in the ways people organize among communities, trying to fight for their own survival, for the lives of the generations to come? And I would like to just give one very small example of the kind of hope I could see. It was 1.5 years after the accident in October 2012. Professor OHASHI here, and also two other of the colleagues, that is Emiko Fujioka-san and Toshiyuki Takeuchi-san. Then they took me and also Vinod Reiner and two other friends on a one-day trip to Fukushima. And it was actually a very dismal situation when you see such beautiful scenery, but there's no people there. And we know that the odorless, colorless scene is full of danger. And but then at that evening, during dinner, before we went back to Tokyo, I think Professor OHASHI would remember that scene. We were in the room, we were discussing, and Emiko-san was sitting opposite me. So I asked her, I said, you came from Tokyo, you could have stayed in Tokyo, but what made you decide to stay here right in the middle of the area, which is contaminated with radiation that you cannot see, you cannot smell, and yet it is there. And she said to me very calmly, she said, well, I'm already 40 years old and I think I can contribute, and also, and so I want to do something for the younger generation. I was actually very, very moved when Emiko-san said this. I think for her, it seems so natural that she, being so privileged, that she could be leaving the scene, she could leave Tokyo, she could even leave Japan and and live a comfortable life somewhere else, a so-called secure life somewhere else. She didn't choose that. She opted to go to the scene of the catastrophe so that she could be working with the communities. And she was only 40. And 40 is such a young age to be doing so many things. And I must tell you that I was very, very moved. And I still remember that night when we had dinner together and she spoke this so calmly, so peacefully. And it's not something, it's not heroic. It's not something, she didn't say it in a very heroic way, say that, no, I must fight this and that. No. It was so quiet, so calm, and yet there is this conviction and this spirit of commitment, which she doesn't see as sacrifice. And I think, well, in these years, in my interactions with friends from Japan and from elsewhere, I have seen this spirit of perseverance, this spirit that of commitment, and I think you will see this spirit when you listen to the speakers that are going to speak. But thank you very much.